And this is a work in progress, and it's such a privilege to be here with you. Thank you so much. And being here with you today, I chose this particular project because where we're at with it, we're nearing the end of some of the main analyses, but there's other questions we have, and I know that all of you have different opinions on things, and I want to hear that feedback to find ways to make this better and see what the other questions we're asking. Now, with that also in mind, let me tell you a little bit more about myself, because I know there is about half of the groups, I think, I'm trying to memorize who was here last time, just tell a little bit more about who I am. I actually started here at Chapman. My first 4 years of my career were here at Chapman. It was amazing. It was rumbling. It was, it was an amazing experience. And my wife even told me when I was talking to her yesterday, she said, "You sound happy." And that's not a good sign. I wasn't happy before, but she's like, "No, you actually sound happy." And I go, "Well, right, because I'm here at Chapman. It's just a happy place. It does things like that for you." So, no, and when I started working here, I had never worked with economists before. There's a large group of economists, wonderful scholars here, all different types. But as I worked with them, as I still keep doing work with Abe, Wen, Mark, mathematician, I understand. And other people that you know well, like Roman Sharametta used to be here, or even Rachel Croson that's come here numerous times. I learn more how little I know. And it's very a privilege to work with such excellent scholars here at Chapman. And I wanted to give you just a brief overview of the work that I do. The research I do tends to fall into two camps of decision-making problems involving interdependence between the decision makers, or among them, if it's happening, if it's more than two people. That's cooperative decisioning, competitive decision-making. Here's some papers that have had published recently. The majority of it, it's all falling here in the middle. There's always tends to be this mixed motive that's going on. They can compete and cooperate at the same time. Social dilemmas, classic negotiation problems. But anytime, for instance, if you pour salt on the floor, like my 4-year-old does every day, what happens is you get these granules that fall off of the stack. And I have a handful of papers that are still on decision making, but they fall off the stack. They don't involve a lot of interdependence. And so the paper I'm going to be talking about today in particular is, I think, something that falls off the stack. It's about decision making, but right away I don't see tremendous interdependence between, as we'll talk more about here, the umpire, the referee who's making the calls, and the batter and pitcher who are there involved in this game, trying to get each other out or trying to get onto base. So what we're talking about here today, I'd like to show you some examples of. We're going to be talking about what baseball calls bad calls or missed calls, and then what is called makeup calls. I've also heard them called reverse calls, and let's actually see what happens here. I'm about to play 2 videos with no sound. That's actually good to see with no sound because these commentators tend to bias. They also have their own opinions of what's going on. This is, yes, the 2009 American League Championship. So these two teams, the Angels and New York Yankees, are playing for the pennant. The winner of this will go on to the World Series and compete with someone from the National League, doing the exact same type of tournament. Here's the first time that Mark T is up at bat. There's currently 3 balls and 2 strikes. Now, I'll do my best throughout this presentation where I feel I need to talk a little about the rules of the game. Whatever happens here, if he doesn't swing, if Mark does not swing at this ball, he's either going to get walked to first, because it will be 4 balls, or he's going to be out. It's going to be a strike, and he goes down, and this will be the first of 3 outs. There's also 2 people on base. They got on for whatever reason. They're on there. So, okay, let's see what happens. We're going to see this a few times, this particular video. I'd be welcome to hear your thoughts on it. Here comes the pitch. There's a plate umpire who makes the calls. He's right there in black. Out. Now, wait a second. Dang it. You can see it on his face. I said whatever he's saying, right? Now they're going to slow it down. Anything outside of the box is a ball. Anything within the box is a strike. You're out. And even right there, he's getting ready to throw his bat. He's getting ready to throw his bat and walk to first base. Let's watch it one more time. Let's see it again. Now, here he is again. They're playing for the pennant. And this is pretty. This is a big deal. Here it comes. He felt that it was out. He goes to walk. He hears the guy yell, "Out!" Ooh. Okay, dang it. All right. Now, Yeah, here, one more time. See, here it is outside of this little box. They now know at the computers exactly where this ball is. And what was that?
So why do they even need the ump?
This is that's a big question in and of itself, right? Because the joy of the game would be gone, like, I guess. Depends who you are. If you're the pitcher, this is great. You know, like, okay.
We have a very strong union.
Now, right. Now, here we see something else. Mark is up again. This is his next time up in the whole game. We are now in inning 4. Typically, 9 innings in baseball, you can always go over if they're tied at 0 or multiple points. This is the 4th inning, so 2 innings, actually, we'll get 3 innings they've gone through now. Here he is. He's up again for the first time in this inning, 2nd time in the game total. Currently, there is 1 pitch that's been made. It was called a ball. Sorry, it was called a strike. Okay? So we have no balls, no one's on base, there's no outs, we're just here. Here we go. Same umpire. This is important. Unless the umpire faints, dies, it's happened before, someone's had a heart attack before, so the plate umpire, the plate umpire does not change the entire game. Once he's in, he's in. It's the same guy there the whole time. This is important.
Well, that doesn't always happen.
It's
well, get injured or have a heart attack or lose a guy.
That is true. We've controlled for this though, and all the data we have, he's never changed.
It's a rare event.
It is a rare event.
Very
And the data that we're going to show you here today, we've controlled for this, but there was never any changes anyway. Okay, in the 2008 to 2014 data that we have of every game that was played. So here we go. Here is the pitch. Ball. All right. Yeah. I don't know what his look at his face is, but okay. Now I'm going to show it again because that's not a replay. Ball. Now I want you to look. Now we're reading into gestures and things like this. It's just something you should look at. Look closely at the umpire after he says ball. Just kind of a strut. It's kind of interesting. Okay, I don't want to read into that too much, but this is what's called a curve ball. The curve ball is in the strike zone. It's right above the belt. This is beautiful. Ball. Huh? Okay, and then there's another throw again. The guy throws another. This time he throws another curve, but it goes out. Ball. He even, if we put the words on here, go, that's outside. He says that. That's outside. You can hear him speaking. All right, fine. But there's no such thing as make-up calls. It could just be that this umpire is just making mistakes, because it happens. It happens all the time, and that's part of the beauty of the game. There's errors in it. In the dead ball era, back in the 19s, up to the 1920s, there was one umpire the entire game. There was no first base umpire, no second base, no third base. One guy standing out there having to see it all. And there's these amazing stories of him talking about how the batter at the home plate would try to distract the umpire to look over at him so that the guy in first base would just run straight across over the mound to third base. Oh yeah, I mean, there's a great book out called Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty, which exonerates this famous dead ball hitter for being a racist jerk. But it turns out it was all made up. I mean, the guy actually uses something that historians hadn't used at that point, data, to show that none of that's real at all. It was made up just books, but they have stories of that in there. Not Cobb doing that, but other players going, yeah, he was one of the few players that just didn't cut right across the whole diamond. That's what we used to do, just run right across the diamond. You try to get the umpire's attention and threaten to kill him or whatever at the plate, and then they would just right across. Ooh, it got to third. I don't know how it happened. You know, but there's all these umpires here still, but there's these errors taking place. There's errors taking place all the time in these games. Whether are they safe, are they not? You've seen it all. Now, this one.
Before you do that,
yeah.
So I'm not sure if you control for this in the data or you deal with it. First of all, you made a slip, just to let you know that in fact you're probably not a great baseball fan. They're not called points, they're called runs.
Fair enough. Jeez. Fair enough. See,
I'm just trying to be, but here it is.
I'll make a confession in a minute about that.
These two situations are totally different in the following senses. There's 2 guys on, you're going to fill the bases with 1 out. That's more devastating. This has got nobody on.
lower leverage.
Now,
it's a
the
0-1.
game's different. Here we're at 4 up. They're up 4 on them
I
now.
understand, so who
Right.
cares about this? And it's 0-1 pitch, who cares, right? And so these are, this makeup is of very little consequence, right?
You're already admitting it's a makeup, though, Dave. I don't know.
That's okay.
It's not.
Well, I know, how would you know?
It's a
No,
makeup.
okay,
What we're going to
I'm
be
just
able
using
to
the
do,
terminology there.
what
So-
we're going to be able to do in this case, as you'll see in a little bit, I won't get into the specifics of this index that Tango developed, that Tom Tango, which is his alias, by the way. No one knows who the guy really is. No, that's what he's famous for. Like, no one knows who. He's on television, he's all this stuff, but he developed something called the leverage index to measure in any situation of the game, at any point, how critical the current call is going to be, or whatever happens. It turns out that does matter, but even controlling for this, we still keep seeing this phenomenon of the make-up call.
So that leverage index is for each plate appearance, not for each pitch, right?
For each plate appearance, right? The current status of where they
It's
are.
the probability that the outcome of this plate appearance can affect the outcome of the game. Which,
Right.
so obviously we have much higher leverage in the first situation than the
Yes.
second one, right? But
Yes.
not pitch by pitch.
No, no,
Plate
sorry.
appearance by
Thank you
plate
for correcting me. So to take this to an extreme, bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, we're down by 3. You know, that's a high level. That's a very high leverage moment. Top of the first inning, 0 to 0. Oh my gosh, you know, like this so doesn't matter. You know, like yes, okay, like now. What we're going to do here is, I wanted to make a confession. I did not start getting. I was the broken heart to my father. My father, God rest his soul, loved baseball. His whole life he played it. He wanted to become a professional. Never happened that way. I couldn't stand the sport growing up. Just wait a second. But it wasn't because he loved it too much more. No, it wasn't that. They put me out there in the gear and the ball would go by, but I'd be looking at the ants over here. Oh, the ants. You know, like when I was 15, I'm just kidding. Like, no, I'm just kidding. It just wasn't my thing. It wasn't until, I have to confess, my kids started getting into ball. My kids started playing ball, and I started really liking them. Like, gosh, I wish, Dad, I wish you were here. Like, I really now like it a lot. But in a weird way, I actually don't like modern baseball. I actually like watching very old games. I don't know why I like old baseball history. So,
Faster.
So.
But that,
And a lot more
I've heard
facts.
the following comments, of course, about umpires, and I don't know if you control for this either, that they all have a different strike zone. Oh, this guy calls high strikes. He's a batter's, umpire, and so.
The closest we get to it is using the umpired fixed effects. So as you'll see in the fixed effects Bolger regression that we use here, we control the game, the batter, the pitcher, the umpire, the year. That's the best we can do in terms of controlling for who's up there, who this guy is, right? Because the same umpire doesn't umpire every single game at the plate. That's for sure, which is why we had to control for that. But once he's up there, except for rare occurrences, he's there, right? Once he's there, he's there. So. In terms of some things that umpires say, there was a great book written in 1997 by a guy named John Skinner. And what he does is he interviews, he's a political and sports writer out of Iowa, I think. He interviewed a host of major league umpires that had spanned the dead ball era, who were still alive, all the way up to the modern times in the 90s, but they were at least retired. They were all retired, so they had very little incentive to go and say different things. And the book's about a host of things. It's just his interviews with all of them. And the interview is pretty free with each person. They kind of just start going, and he kind of starts, and he leads them here and there, but he doesn't have a set protocol where he's going. At least if he does, he doesn't admit to that in his book. But there's 2 particular spots in this book called umpires, where the umpires themselves bring up missed calls. There's only 2 spots in the whole book. And here's what umpire Don Denker explains. If an umpire thinks he missed a call, he isn't going to make up for it by missing the next one too. There are no makeup calls. And that was the end of it. And then he went on and started talking about this World Series he was the head umpire for. And then we have Terry Cooney, who's also being interviewed at a different time, different place. He did this over a multi-year period. And here he goes. Now, sometimes you hear people talk about a call, and they ask, is that a makeup call? That's ridiculous. No umpire in his right mind would make a makeup call, because you try to get him right, all right, every time. That's all we have in here. And of course, it's a selected sample. It's a bias sample of 23. The 23 that you can still find them, or every type of notoriety, them are dead. Okay, he came close to getting 2 more, but they passed away before he could get to them in the line. But so here's what the umpires say: there's no such thing as makeup calls. I mean, now one could look at this in a very strategic way. Why would they ever admit makeup calls if they're words? They're totally undermine the entire process, right? I mean, we make mistakes, but we don't intentionally make them, right? Because that'd be bad. That'd be awful if that's what was going on. So here are some of our research questions. We wanted to know, do makeup calls actually occur in Major League Baseball? That's just what we're picking here for this one. We've heard the other stories there in football, hockey, we've heard it all, but we're going to look in Major League Baseball. And if they do occur, and we do find out if they do occur, when are they most likely to happen? And this last part here, we're trying to debate and tease apart the data enough. Why? Because there could be different explanations and be combinations of reasons of why it's happening. Yes?
We already know they occur though, right? I mean, I just checked one internet website, there's copious research demonstrating that makeup calls occur in baseball using PitchFX data to demonstrate. So is there something about the data that you have or the setting that adds to the knowledge that
What
we
we're
have?
going to be doing here is seeing, well, first we're going to look at to see the effect sizes of those things, but we're also going to want to look at to see when they're most likely to happen. What is it that encourages the umpire to use a missed call, like to make up for a missed call? Is it just, oh, go ahead.
I'm just, so who, do the umpires get paid by the league,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
maybe their job is to, partly to make games exciting.
Take it.
No, you were talking about like, is this a cooperative or competitive environment?
No,
They get evaluated by their
Now, I will
accuracy.
say, there is some data we don't show here, looking at what happens, do they give makeup calls to the individual player? Because that's what we look at here, the player themselves. Mark T gets up, what happens the next time he gets up, right? But what happens if he gets a bad call, and I'm totally making this up in terms of the lineup, Derek Jeter gets up. Is Derek Jeter treated any differently? He's one of the Yankees. That guy just went down, he just got called out. He shouldn't have been out, he should still be up there batting right now. Or he should have been walked. And our preliminary data show that they actually do show favoritism towards the team as well. But that when they do show favoritism to the team, when they have an opportunity to, because sometimes the guy gets up there and just swings at them all, right? And there's nothing the umpire can do. Foul, foul, strike, hit, out, whatever it is. But it seems, and I don't show the data here because we've been analyzing this even while I've been here, it seems that once the umpire gives a makeup call in proxy to another team member, that still, it does reduce the chances of him giving a makeup call to Mark T when he comes up again, but he still gives them a makeup call. It's strange. He gives it to the team, but then he remembers. Then the next guy comes. Then when Mark T comes back up, ball, it's a strike. You know, like, it's fascinating. Now, that's what we see so far. We need to really look at the interaction effect of the team-player dynamic yet. We haven't done that yet, so I can't speak any more on that yet.
So I guess my point is that one's kind of, we already know one. I mean, there's lots of research to demonstrate one.
If you can send me some of that, that'd be really good. Because we were looking at this, because we were seeing a lot of stories on this, and the umpires are making errors. What we're more interested in initially was trying to get at the mechanism of what's driving it. Could it be this cooperative thing where they're trying to make the game more exciting? Like, why it's happening.
Are you familiar with the research that the strike zone shrinks on a 3-0 count, expands on an 0-2 count?
No, I know.
Or maybe I had that backwards. There's research. There's lots of this stuff out there.
That's different than a makeup call. That's the makeup call.
But the mechanism may be similar, though. The existence of this research and the understanding of the mechanisms that likely drive that research may be a similar mechanism that helps drive the
That might be true, but
here. The idea is that they prefer, the sense is that they prefer for the people on the field to determine the outcome. So on a 3-0 count, the pitch really has to be in the middle of the strike zone for them to call. The pitch has to be clearly outside of the strike zone for them to call it a ball, because they don't want to be the one to determine the outcome, and so there can be a very similar mechanism.
So that I don't mess up the names that you would be naming off, I'd love to talk with you after.
Sure.
To hear some of the references. of this,
Okay, yeah, well,
You know, and to see how good their work was.
I-
You know, so, you know, but sorry, what was it?
So I'm still not entirely clear what a makeup call is. Can you define
Sure.
that specifically?
So it's a circumstance where the umpire, well, in the case of the batter, let's just say, now he makes a call that favors the person who in the previous pitch he gave that person a missed call.
So it's where there's a disagreement between the umpire's call and between the computer estimate.
Yes.
So when we see that disagreement, then the next.
Consecutive pitch, conceivably, where, be
Yeah.
careful, where the batter doesn't swing and doesn't get hit with the ball.
Mhm.
Because if the batter gets hit by the ball, he gets a free walk to first, right? This is where the umpire must make a call. Does that just make sense? I guess he makes a call every time, but it's how, if the guy swings, okay, that was a strike and he misses, no matter how far out it was.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So it's where there's a disagreement between the computer and the umpire.
Yes. Now,
What happens immediately following that? So
the next
the umpire
time,
made a
yes.
mistake. The umpire made a mistake, and do they move on from that, or they?
Or does it bias their judgment the next time?
Yeah.
The
And how
next
does
time,
it-
not the next
But
pitch.
it's about the direction. of
The next
mistake.
time where he has to make a
Right.
call.
If it was a
so
mistake
it
that
could be
harmed
the
you
same
last
as
time,
that.
it should be a
It
mistake.
could be if the guy doesn't swing. In the case of Mark T, he went down, right? He's standing there out shooting, he doesn't see him for whatever. And it could also have been, let's give another, because we see all of these and all the data we look at. Mark T gets a bad call, okay, then the next pitch comes, he swings at it and misses, well, okay, you're out. You know what I mean? Like, so the next question is, regardless of then what Mark does, if he swung at the next one, the next time he has a chance for the umpire to make a call, what does the umpire do? So,
Now, let me just follow, this is a small one, I don't know if you control for this, but suppose it's a bad call, you know, and it's not the Mark T case, which is, that was a very specific clean one, it's super clean. And
yes.
the next pitch, he homers. Does that like clean it slate, or does the next time you come up?
We do control for that, for what
Okay.
they did previously and what happens, like of what happens after the player comes up. Now, in the case of, yeah, and
Yeah, so if at that same at bat, it wasn't, you know, the fourth ball or third strike,
Mhm.
it was, you know, only the first strike, he calls it a strike, and then the next pitch he homers.
right, does he still get the back?
Did you
to
go
him?
when he next up, or was?
I am so sorry, that's my wife. I wish we could look increase.
You can tell me it's gone great.
No, it's a summons, no, another one? You're right. My dad served summonses for years, that was his job. So, but with the data we have, we do control for that, and that doesn't seem to matter either. It's the next time a call can be made for that batter. Now, one more and then we go to the next slide.
Yeah. Like I told you this was gonna happen.
No, I knew it's going to. One more. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, you.
so setting aside, I'm sorry, you're in the middle of your sentence, right? Setting aside individual umpire zones, the aggregate zone that's called in games differs from the actual sort of, so do you consider an error to be something that's outside of the defined zone or something that's outside of the aggregate called zone?
We're looking at the defines.
Okay, so some of those aren't, so it's just a matter of sort of defining the term error.
Right. Thank you. We'll make sure. I think in the extended abstract we have, I think we make that clear, but I think we're going to compare it to the other one just to make it clear.
Sure.
Thank you, because that is true as well. Anyone that plays Little League or watches their kids play Little League, that strike zone moves everywhere. Right? It's supposed to be.
No, it's just with the human eye, right? You set up inside the catcher, you're making guesses on the
Of
outside,
course.
so it's just the human eye can't.
Of course.
There's just limitations.
Of course. Oh, gosh, yes. Now, as I just said here, I'm going to be using different terms. I'll try to stay away from jargon, but I'm going to default to it again. And when I use the wrong jargon, like points versus runs, I really need to be here to help me. You know what I mean?
I'll be there, don't worry.
Oh, I know you will. Okay, so here's some of the things that we actually found. I'm going to get into the effect sizes themselves in just a little bit, but let me just tip the hand here and say that we're only looking at data within the playoffs. Okay, we're only looking at data within the playoffs from each league. So there's 2 leagues, National League, American League, and by the end of the time, there's teams competing within these leagues for the championship of the league, and then those 2 leagues then go to the World Series. And then there's a World Series championship winner, right? So here's what we found. So umpires, of course they make errors in calls. That we knew already. They make it against the batters and pitchers. But what we found was in our data is that the make-up calls only happen, really, against the batters. The pitchers have errors made on them all the time. The dude throws a strike and the guy calls a ball. But then the make-up doesn't happen. There's nothing that happens like after that. Controlling for all these things. It's the batter that's getting the benefits from these make-up calls when Mark T's up there and he's getting ready to walk and it doesn't happen. We also find that umpires, they're less likely to call a strike regardless, and specifically of the ball's location. And we're able to control for it within that grid, outside of the grid where it is, regardless of where it falls. They're less likely to call a strike against that batter if they had made a bad call on that batter in the previous pitch, where they had to make the call. But what we also found was controlling, when you start putting the leverage index in here, using the interaction effect, when you're looking at batters, the likelihood of them giving a make a call, that grows as the current stakes or the leverage rises within that point of the game. The point of the game where the make a call can be made. Yes.
So does that vary home or away?
Sorry.
Does that vary whether it's the home or away?
It does not matter.
Okay,
And
so
we
it's
look
not
at-
like
yeah,
they're
we
getting
can-
caught up
no.
in the hysteria of the crowd. Or
No, that's what we found. And the proxy we have is where are they, right? What location are they at with the field? Is the current batter who are they right now? Now there are effects that they do affect. We'll see. Well, actually, I don't present it all here. It's in the paper, so you can see all these things really make effects. But even controlling for all this, there's still some tremendous magnitude here, as we'll see in a minute.
Sorry, there's 3 playoff rounds, only one of them is for the quote-unquote pennant. Are you only looking at the LCSs, or are you looking at all 3 playoff rounds?
This is the.
We're in the weeds.
The LC.
Sorry?
We're in the weeds, LCSs, I don't know what that is.
League
Oh, I'm sorry.
Championship Series.
So the semifinals, let me put it that. So the semifinals, there's quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals. Only the semifinals are technically for the pennant. Are you looking at all 3, or just the semifinals?
No, we control. We're looking at all 3, and we
Okay.
control for where they are in
Yeah.
those events as well.
So the pennant, that's just
Sure,
wrong.
sure. I see what you're saying. They're turning, moving towards the pennant, is trying to get there. All right.
One last thing, is there another index for how close the pitch call is, if it's borderline?
Okay, so you mean, what do you mean?
Like, you see that little box,
Yes.
sometimes it's like, right on the edge there.
It is sometimes right on the edge. The data that we use
Doesn't-
robustly for this, we use Baseball Savant, and then one other one called Retro. But like Baseball Savant data, it's just using the designated box, and it just marks it whether or not what zone it was in, what type of pitch it was, speed of it, all this.
Yeah.
Because we were concerned about that as well, right? Because if this, as you notice that little box, we'll show it in a minute. If they're throwing out in the corner, they call them, I think, what do they call it? The Rembrandts? The pictures that will try to paint the corners of the box. They try to get it right out at the edge so that the batter thinks it's going to be a ball. And then strike. Dang it! You know what I mean? Like it's right on the edge. They're trying to do that. That can be hard. I mean, it's right down the center. It's just a pipe throw right down the middle. Okay. We know what it is. But those edge ones, that's rough. So we control for all that, at least using the designated box. Now, why are we looking at umpires? This is the one time in the presentation where in this paper even, we want to be careful with generalizing, but as management scholars, what made us interested in this is there's a lot of jobs out there, this is the only thing we'll say about it, where workers are evaluated by others who are subjectively evaluating a standard. So another place where we see this, and there's a really good paper by named Pixie, he was a law professor at the University of Washington, who talks about, and it's just an essay, there's no data, at least that he's shown. It's in talking about in the legal profession during trials. The lawyers will talk to each other and say that the judge is giving makeup calls. He has been writing the defense the entire time, and then suddenly he starts writing the prosecution. And it's just fascinating, and they talk about this, and they're likening it to sports to say that in these chambers, in these court situations, there's reason to believe that judges begin to move around a little bit. And like, why are they suddenly now coming down hard on the other direction from the same trial? But it's the same lawyer. Like, huh? Now, they don't know about that, but we see things like that. Another thing to consider is, I'll say this much, academic tenure.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
No, of course.
Nothing's
No one ever
subjective
evaluates.
here.
No, but like in any
No.
type of job and environment, you're looking, you have a standard, I guess, that's there. But you have people then that look at the standard and make subjective judgments. I'm not talking about makeup calls. I'm just talking about people looking at something and it's very obvious what it is. Right? It was pretty obvious that guy made a pitch that was outside of the zone. But maybe not. And then the second pitch, it's very obvious that it was inside of the zone. Ball. Okay, this is odd. So what that was another reason why we're interested in looking at this particular data, is because we actually have data, you know, and just like in economics, you tend to go where there's data. And unless you're experimental, you go in the lab and try to find that data to see if it exists. So, in addition to this, we're interested in this type of a context because the evaluator's judgment can have a strong effect on the subjective performance of a person. That batter's batting average is what they live and die by. I mean, that's what, if you're having a batting average of 300 or above and you're hitting 40 home runs a game, you're going to be making bank regardless of if that team sucks. I mean, it's yeah, maybe you're capped a little bit of how the teams do, of who the team is, but I guarantee you that average means a lot to them. So when you start getting weird calls like that out there, and you're only up there 3.1 times a game, and you have 3 calls, like to get you to, and they call you out, that's it. You know, like it moves. I know there's a lot of games they're playing, but this can have tremendous effect. Now, we also suspected this was going to matter for the pitchers. It didn't. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. We have some ideas, but we'd like your ideas too.
Sorry. There's one other thing here in this setting, and that is the catchers. The catchers can influence the calls. You control for the framing ability of the catchers?
Framing ability, what do you mean?
So the catchers can influence whether a called pitch is a ball or a strike. The physical location can be the same, but the manner in which they present it, the steadiness with which they hold their glove, the movement of the glove, the location of their shoulder to give the umpire a better
The fixed
view.
effect, the closest we get to is the fixed effect of the catcher.
There's a catcher fixed effect. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's useful. That's very useful.
Bart.
Why do you call that the subjective performance? If it's a statistic,
If it is, it's a statistic in the sense that, well, that umpire is making calls. In the case of Mike T, he should have still been up there swinging. He's out. And like, dang. And so that's influencing, that's how we call it that. Maybe it's not the correct term. The way I'm thinking of it as well, this average in many ways is affected by the subjective judgment of this umpire standing up there saying whether or not it was at a ball or a strike. That's what I mean by that. Of course, in the end, the batting average, it is a number, but it's being determined by the subjective evaluation of the standard. That's what I mean by it.
You guys made a makeup call adjusted batting average?
Ooh, that'd be interesting. No, I haven't. I haven't. That'd be interesting. That would be interesting.
Missing out on sabermetrics, maybe.
Maybe Tom Tango is coming with that. So here's our sample and method. I'm going to go over it here, not in as much detail. I do have a lot more of it in that particular abstract I sent around, but this is 29,249 calls made by umpires during playoff games, 2008-2014. Now these calls are specific. They're special types of calls. These are calls for the pitcher. When the pitch came, it didn't result in the batter swinging, and the batter wasn't hit by the ball, and gets to walk to first. Okay? These are situations, it's either going to be a ball or a strike. The umpire has to make a call. You have to say something, okay, for the game to continue to move forward. Now, this is the strike zone. It's shown in a couple of different ways, the technical strike zone. You have 9 spots within the zone. Any pitch that comes within the area of red is considered a strike. Anything outside of it is considered a ball. They actually do mark the areas outside, and then once it gets outside of that, it just keeps going, it's called a ball. But the pitches we're looking at, this is where they're falling. Now, they tend to show it on television if you're watching it 2 different ways. They'll have it down in the corner up here on the right somewhere, and here's the first pitch, the second, the third, the fourth against this particular batter. And you can see where it's falling. Even this one, they actually have the grid that's there, right? Fine. And this particular one, they actually put it right over the pitch that's taking place, almost like a line they draw for first down, I think, in professional football, right? So these are just the 2 ways you can see it. We're not scoring it based off of this. Sorry, we're not marking it as a strike or a ball this way. We're using baseball savant data, which is feeding this into a central computer that they have that we got the data for. So, yeah, it was retro sheet and baseball savant. This is going to be a logit model with fixed effects. I'll only go briefly over the fixed effects, but I'm going to also do the control variables and the other things that we have. So, the outcome variable, the key thing we want to look at is whether or not the umpire calls a strike. The variable that you'll see is called call strike. Because we're using odds ratios here, when we display the actual data, any number, if the coefficient is greater than 1, there's an increase in probabilities when called a strike. Independent of anything else that's going on, and independent where that ball falls, anywhere in that 9 grid and outside of it. If it's below 1, it's a decrease in the probability, as we call strike. Now, with this in mind, explanatory variables, the key ones, we're wanting to look at whether the bad call was against the pitcher, and we'll call that missed pitcher. It was a missed call, bad call, missed call. Whether the bad call was against the batter, and then this last part was stakes, this leverage index. And as we said before, bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, we're down by 3 to tie. The leverage in that game, in that particular point of the game, is much higher than top of the first, no one's on base, we're just starting this game. The leverage index is going to be negative, it's going to be low, going to be below 1. 1 is the average for that game, the probabilities. Above 1, you can keep going up, or you can go by points, 1, 2, 3, but all the way up to 24, okay? In terms of high index, this is like the moment of time versus we can keep going pretty low, saying this is not that big of a deal. Now, the key variables, control variables, is the location of the ball, it's the count of balls and strikes. 2 balls, 2 strikes, 3 balls, 1 strike, no strikes, no balls, whatever it is. Whether the batter's from the home team, the number of runs, the batter's team is either up or down compared to the other team. Are they up by 8, are they down by 3? And then the type of pitch. So there's 13 generic pitches they catalog in, in the MLB. They've thrown out the spitball. The spitball became illegal in 1920. They used it all the time up until that point, and then all these new pitches began to form. So we control for whether it's a 3-frame fastball, a slider, a screwball, knuckleball, fastball. Oh my gosh. Some of them are rarer than others, but we control for all of that. Because the type of pitch they throw may greatly affect how well that umpire can call something.
Does that count, meaning that you treat 2 strikes as equivalent to 2 balls?
No, we have a lot of dummies for this. So 2 balls is not the same as 2 strikes.
So you have 11 different dummies.
Yeah. I'm sorry. No. And of course, one's left out for the dummy variable trap. I'm sorry, Eric. Lots of different. There's all these contingencies. My gosh, I'm looking at this. Thank you so much for paying attention. And then fixed effects. I didn't put a catcher on here. That's also on there. Game pitcher, batter, your catcher. Okay, want to make sure this. Yes.
How about whether they've swung already, the batter?
Yes. So what you're getting at is
An effort on the batter's part.
the effort on the batter's
The
part.
umpire
Whether
is
it's swung.
very unlikely to do a makeup call if you haven't shown any effort. If you're gonna be the batter that just sits there and doesn't swing, they're never gonna give you a makeup call. But if you've been attempting, you've swung twice already, you've got 2 strikes, and you've shown that call off swing, but I thought that was a bad call, so I didn't swing, and now they need to owe you a makeup call because you actually tried.
So you think it'll matter? That's interesting.
I know.
And more generally, the batters can dynamically adjust their
It's
strategy
part of that's embedded
when they
in the account,
expect
yeah.
that these calls are coming,
You
right?
can get the strikes.
That batters might be willing to hold off a little bit more because they expect a makeup call coming. So that
In the example you showed in the video, he had 1 strike already.
He had 1 strike. I have to go
Did
back
he
into the
swing?
videos. I have to go back into
Because
the
I bet if he
videos.
swung, it changes whether it's
We
the
can look at
makeup
that.
call.
So it's not just what the count is, it's what the batter has done to make the count what it is, right?
Yep.
Something would tell me, based off of the data that we had, he didn't swing on that first strike, otherwise he would have given him a ball. Something, possibly, maybe, right? But I'm going to go back and look, not just the video,
The other thing.
the Savant data has that. The Savant data has every single action the batter takes within a given time where he's on the plate. Swing, hit, chipped, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Because the other thing we pointed out was how the batter was ready to throw his bat to walk to first. I wouldn't use that so much as evidence because everyone knows that you're supposed to do that, regardless of if it's a strike or a ball. You've got to make the umpire make the decision. You can't make the decision for them. So in that case, it'd kind of be the same thing. You've got to show the effort that you thought it would walk.
Sure, I like that. Thank you. That we don't have in here, meaning did the batter swing at it, but we have the data.
Yeah.
We have it right there. Okay, thank you for that. Yes?
I would guess that effort call could also, that effort judgment could also be relevant most relevant when you're about to get a walk. Like if you haven't swung earlier in the at-bat, maybe the umpire may not want to call 4 balls by himself if you haven't swung.
That's the 3-0 thing I mentioned, that there is research on that shows that.
Okay.
So
The zone shrinks on 3-0.
I like that. We can control for that because I know from watching Little League ball that the umpire, that some of these kids, they'll look at the pitcher, this pitcher is awful. And so they just don't swing at all. They just get ready to get walk because the kid's throwing it into the dugout. Right? You know, the kid's like throwing it into, hit someone in the eye or in the audience, right? And so at sometimes that you can even hear the referee will, the umpire will stop and go, you need to try swinging the ball. So he's going to throw it over there the whole time. Well, you got to at least try, you know, like, because what if he throws a strike? You know, it's like the same idea, right? And so he's less likely just to let him walk, maybe. You know, like, oh, that's a strike, you know, maybe. Okay, so here's some of the things that we found. These errors in the makeup calls, they do go against batters and pitchers, but it's the batters that seem to enjoy the makeup calls, and the pitchers do not. So these are odds ratios here in this fixed effects version that we have. To interpret this, one way to think about this, it's less than 1. So the umpire is about 20% less likely to call a strike on the batter, regardless of where that ball falls, if the previous call he made on that batter was a bad call. It's going in the right direction for the missed pitcher, but it's not there. Okay, now that said, now we get to this question of the leverage index. Leverage is impacting it. It's affecting it, but it's the, as you see here, it's these additive effects. So if you take this and 87, for instance, 89 to 49 to the 7th power, right? If you leverage index of 7, you start rising it. The interaction becomes quite significant in an economic sense, not to mention also in a statistical sense. But for each point of the leverage index, if this rises above 1, it decreases the umpire's likelihood of calling a strike by 9%, regardless of where that ball falls. Now, so you can put this in a situation, and we did like a simulation in the paper, so if you're bottom of the night, down by 2, you have 3 on the board, you have a leverage of like 7. So you're going to do 89 to the 7th power, and then you multiply that into the 20%, 21 to 20%. That's a very high percentage. We're up to like, what, 64%? 64% less likely that dude's going to call a strike. That's quite practically significant, I would think. Now, there's some other things we could be controlling. I really like that batter. I could really be swung. But these are some of the effects that we have found. The question that's on our minds now, why the batters? So why not go ahead.
This is really cool. Before you get to that question, why is what's the interpretation for the variance on the missed pitcher coefficient being 2 or 3 times larger than the variance on the missed batter coefficient? What's the what does that tell us?
These are odds ratios, so we're above, right?
The variance. So the
variance.
That's what I mean. Yeah, why is the variance
interpretation of that?
That must be that's really interesting because the magnitude is about the same, right?
It's close, 15, 20. It's 15 above, 20 below.
So there's probably some interesting story in there about that variance being crazy.
Thoughts from anyone on that? Because it's puzzled us. Because we know the data's been done correctly, in the assessment, we're looking at it, and we have some ideas of what's potentially happening. Why is it that? Because they're making bad calls against both sides. One of the ideas we have thought of, and we have to now go in and assess this, there's going to come to a point where I don't know what more we can do in terms of the data itself, but at first we thought, well, maybe it's because batters, well, actually, let's go right here. Let's do it this way. Why do they even do makeup calls in the first place? My first thought was like, well, maybe it's something about the reputation of the industry, because umpires have scores, right? There's tons of people watching them and keeping track of them. At first I thought, well, maybe it had something to do with the fans. Maybe they don't want to piss off the fans, and that's why they do makeup calls. I'm like, no, because it's like a zero-sum game almost. So you make a bad call on Mark T, people get upset, like, so he gives him a makeup call later, bad call to makeup call. But that makeup call then goes against the pitcher that's out there from the opposing team. And so you have the Angels fans who are like, come on, you know what I mean? Like, you have half, conceivably, whatever, of the fans happy, and the other half not. I know we have a home game, visitor game, but half the people watching, let's say, are upset. Like, that other half are, great, walk them, or whatever it is, right? But maybe it's something to do with the industry. Now, there is this other idea that maybe they're playing you need to make it exciting down there. Kind of like in the UFC, right, where they want the fights to be more brutal, so they tell them, like, you need to drag this out. It's quite fascinating. Don't even kill them.
Just because the batter sat down, the pitcher hasn't necessarily, right? So the makeup call could happen with the next batter.
And we do find evidence of that. Now we have to be careful of this because now we're like, well, what does it mean when you interact with a team? because we found that even when you throw the team in, meaning Derek Jeter gets up there, and he's more likely to get. Pitcher throws a ball, sorry, pitcher throws a strike, ball.
I was saying for the pitchers.
Oh, for the
That-
pitchers,
You know,
I'm
the ump's like, I've already made it up to you by the time this guy's back up his bat.
Yeah, how do you measure that for the pitcher,
With what?
for a makeup call for the pitcher,
Oh.
the next batter?
It was just the next pitch the pitcher throws.
Oh, okay, so
Well,
it's
he
not the
has
next
to make
time
a
he sees
call.
the same batter again.
No, it's
Okay,
the next
that's-
time for the pitcher. So we did it for the individual. The next time Mark T gets up there, it's the next time Mark T gets there. For the pitcher who's down there, like Wakefield, right? He throws the strike, ball, dang it. You know, like, no, it's not. You're like, whatever. He throws it again, strike.
From my
Like,
experience
but-
as a pitcher, the
Sure.
makeup call for the pitcher should be within that same batter or the next batter. And
Same
then after
batter.
that, you wouldn't find effect from that point on.
So
I
we've
would-
done this, we're not finding it, that's the problem, because
Oh, that's what I
that
was
is what's happening, he's still up there, throws another one, right? Mark T sits down, whatever, Derek Jeter gets up, he throws a ball. Strike! No. I mean, at least it's going, it's not there. Now, there could be an issue with the errors. The next thing could it be, first mechanisms and then like what's going on, could it be guilt? Because like this thing we're trying to figure out how we can measure this. Guilt, there's literature to suggest, you know, in the conflict management, resolution research, that in the apology literature, that people are more likely to try to make it up, not give more above and beyond. That's not value-added atonement. This is just trying to make up for it in some way when the offender realizes I did something wrong and unintentional. What they find is offenders make apologies when it wasn't on purpose. That may seem obvious. Well, the umpire's not meaning to give a blown call. I don't think he is, unless he's trying to make it interesting, right? I don't know. I'll have to think of it more.
I'm just curious, we're talking about guilt or what, I mean, did the umpire know somehow that the umpire's call disagreed with the strike zone that Jonathan was asking about earlier?
This is what we're getting at now. The next step is this. The next step.
I let you
Maybe there's some confound here that maybe with the data we have, we can tease it apart. I think we have to go to the lab and try to recreate, not like a baseball game, but some other type of scenario. We've been planning it out, but it's still in the phases of the process. Maybe it's the fact that the batter is closer. At first, could it just be the fact that you're standing right next to the dang guy? And like, there's this proxemics literature that the closer you are, the more emotion I have for you. The problem is the proxemics literature is everywhere on this. Like, it depends if it's the same gender, and then suddenly it doesn't matter. This is old stuff in the 70s. It's weird. Like, some of it's the opposite. Where the further you are away, when someone's closer to you and they give you negative feedback, like, what? Or like, oh, whatever it is. That's feedback, right? You screwed that up, whatever it is, right? It turns out people actually are less likely to do things to help that person when they're close compared to where they're, are you kidding me? From way over there. It doesn't seem to matter. Like, well, I would go against this, but maybe it's something else. We thought maybe it doesn't have to do with how close they are at all. Maybe it's the fact we've been watching it. Now we have to code it with a blind person, blind to the thing, just to assess it with no sound. Maybe it's the fact it just seems as the batters are more vocal and maybe more, you know, like looks at them like, oh, and it could just be could that be what's going on? And if that's the question, why isn't the pitcher doing that? Now one colleague here outlines me to maybe it's because they don't want to give up their tells of what they were really trying to throw. That could be. Because we've been watching these videos, and before we have our grad students go in and start coding them, like did they or did they not make some type of a roll or whatever, they don't even know what the heck we're looking at, right? And that way we can look, but we're looking at the pitchers, and we're biased, of course, as we're doing this research. We don't see the pitchers responding much at all.
Well, because they're seeing that umpire on every pitch, the batter doesn't, and you don't want to be pissing off the umpire and showing him up. That's a story I've heard, but I'm going to regret this. But the reason why you might not see it in the pitching is what Eric said, is that if you know there's a makeup, you're going to swing at the next one because you know that he's going to call it a strike no matter what. Maybe I should, be a little more aggressive. If it's anywhere close, I'm swinging at it because it's going to be a strike anyway. They're dynamically knowing. If they know it's a makeup, it's going to change their behavior. And then the umpire said, well, yeah, I know he swung at a bad pitch. That's because I screwed up on the last one. That's the makeup. a swing
Well, he
at it.
didn't swing at it, but he's not swinging. These are cases where
I
he's
know,
not
but
swinging.
he swings at it,
Okay.
okay, you don't count that one, right, as a
Sure, okay.
makeup.
Fair
That
enough.
was a makeup.
It would have been the makeup, but
It
would
would've-
have the guy swing at it, it had the same effect as the makeup call would have had.
Because he dynamically said, if it's anything close, I'm gonna swing.
True.
And there, that was a
That'll
makeup.
help me control for that thing what the guy did the
Just,
previous
yeah,
week.
That's
just
all.
to see if they have a strike.
So I know it's wrong. No, it's just wrong. I know it's absolutely incorrect.
What we're thinking of, another thing we're thinking about is maybe, like, the pitcher throws, there's a debate on this, like, the average number of pitches a pitcher throws in a game, it changes, but like, they're throwing a lot, like, what, 100? I mean, I've seen it change over the years, you know, like, but the batter, they're up there 3 times in a game.
Right.
3 strikes and you're out. That batting average is really kind of hot, like, ooh, and if you get a bad call and like, and you're down, like, oh my gosh, tick, you know, like it moves. Now, the ERA and these other things where the measure for the pitcher's performance, maybe it has less of an effect. And so maybe that's why they're not as like, are you kidding me? I mean, we know that it exists. I've seen these classic plays before where the pitcher throws something and the guy that ruined the perfect game or whatever, he's like, you know, like just like kind of looking at it, right? But we just don't see it as much. I welcome your thoughts on why you think maybe the pitcher's not, maybe. Not
So I have
maybe.
a potential explanation that doesn't require any sort of feedback or anything from the batter. What if the umpire's objective function is to have their errors be mean zero for each of the participants in the game? Well, they have fewer opportunities, as Dave's mentioned, with the batter, so they're much more likely in the next few pitches to try to get a mean zero error for the batter. If the pitcher's going to throw 100 pitches, there's more opportunities for them. Not only that, because of the law of large numbers, right? The umpire doesn't have to bias. The umpire simply calls the game normally. That one error isn't going to affect the pitcher as much as it's going to affect the individual hitter. And so that accounts for the noise, and that accounts for the fact that the magnitudes were almost identical for the pitchers and the hitters. It was only 25% difference in the magnitude, but there was a lot of noise in there. And so I think that idea that the objective function of the umpire is to have mean zero errors for each individual participant, that might reconcile everything.
In a way that's kind of like makeup calls.
Yes.
What was that?
In a way that's kind of just a formalization of the
Yes.
idea of makeup calls.
Yeah.
And that's why the argument then, with I like that, the argument is in there for, well, that's why they're doing it then for these batters, but you see it more for the batters, because with the pitchers, there's so many chances it's happening.
Exactly, and that's why the variance on the coefficient was much lighter on the pitchers, even though the magnitude was very similar.
Yeah, I like that. Comments else?
I wanted to go back to the leverage thing, and I mean, in some ways, it makes sense that, I mean, which leverages are you putting in there? Like when they made the first mistake, and now.
The current state of the game as it is now. So,
Okay,
sorry,
but I mean, to go back to that other pitch, like, you know, it's, you know, that, I think that the way, you know, the leverage from when you made the mistake is also important. Like, you're gonna feel more in debt if you made a bad call to the batter when, you know, that, you know, oh, that could have really sparked a rally, or
Right.
like basically,
the only
So we
thing,
weight the errors with the leverage, there you go. That's,
weight the errors of
Yeah, that would do it.
leverage.
Thank
We'll
you.
have to look at that, because we do control the inning and where they're at, and the inning basically can obviously drastically affects leverage, because at the beginning of the game, even if you're down by 6, well, we still have 9 more innings to go, right? You know, like, but about the 9th, we're down by 6, you have a problem. You know what I mean? Like, but you know what? Yeah.
And given the years, you didn't have the Pirates in there. They were.
This is a different angle too. Getting back to this crowd, get more negative feedback when a batter gets in this call than when a pitcher
That's
gets in this
something
call.
we've not looked at yet with the
Yeah,
volume.
decibels,
Like here are the decimals, right? We do have little buttons we can look at, because that was a question, like, is it the bat, you know, like, ooh, you know what I mean? Because we know that
But it makes it more obvious that it was in this call.
potentially, right, it
Yeah.
can, potentially it can. Now, the question is, are they yelling even when they don't know? Because
Yeah, they are.
at the extremes, of course. At the extreme, you're sitting there, and I've seen them. You go to these baseball games; they have their iPads open, and they see the box. They're like, "Come on!" You know, like now I know that was out. You know what I mean? They're screaming at him, right? I mean, does everyone have it open? No, but you know, like that's a good point. I think
Do you think they would like to do a field test and then put it actually at the game right up there?
But, I mean, the crucial question is, does this information make it to the umpire? You know, I mean, like, how does the umpire know that he made a mistake?
Right, now, that's why we're thinking maybe he knows because we would see it if the batter is, like, looks at him, right? Now, another thing we also have to code to try to delve more into the pitchers is, what about the catcher? He's like, come on, Roger, you know what I mean? Like ball, what? You know what I mean? Like, because you'll know, like, I'm staring right at it, you know, like, I can definitely see where the thing is. And I told them what pitch to, you know, or whatever to throw, right?
If you have RAs coding things, coding the length of time the catcher holds his mitt in position will be the best proxy for their opinion, because if the catcher holds the mitt there, you're basically telling the umpire, hey, damn it, that was a strike. I'm showing it here, hold it here. I'm showing you this is a strike. So they hold it there for a while.
But fortunately, we're not the ones who are decoding it. That's what's most important. You know, if you want your PhD tank, you better, no, just kidding, like, no.
I'm not spotting you any of my RAs for that task.
No, it doesn't matter. That's part as long as it's not me.
Questions, I didn't know if they could go for it, possible. There was this management science paper a couple years ago on status bias and macro effects in Major League umpiring. Right? And what they found, so they looked at the pitchers who were known to be good location pitchers, guys like Greg Maddux and Tom Glavine, and they found that umpires systematically gave them larger strike zones. And then they also looked at batters who were known to have a good eye, like Frank Thomas, and they found that they would also get smaller strike zones. Is there a way to control for these types of status effects?
Now, I'd have to look at that paper. I've seen that paper. I've not looked at it in relation to this one. The closest we have now is the fixed effects, the fact that we control for who the pitcher is. Because, right, some pitchers are better than others, and they're famous and they've been around forever compared to others. And so that's the closest we can get right now. They may have a really good way of doing it in there, which we may then adopt. But thank you for referencing that. I remember that one.
It also points out, those guys are long retired before the box ever came. Greg Maddux, we're going way back. No, I mean, just pointing out that those guys they didn't even have those.
But the idea may still hold now. I have to see how they.
Dave's pointing out those players
It's
are old.
clout, right? It's clout. Yeah, I mean, whatever you want to call it, clout, fame, or whatever. Status, sure. That's
Making
it.
a statement about Mark.
So can I ask a question about the umpires themselves?
New play.
Yeah.
So we're talking as if that there's one umpire, like there's one decision maker, and there could be heterogeneity that's at play.
Sure.
And think about the variance provision is that we estimate a positive coefficient on the pitchers. Just that's estimated with noise. So I'm wondering if we can. I'm thinking about. Maybe there's heterogeneity. So there are some umpires who favor the pitchers. Just we're not estimating that. And because of that heterogeneity, that's how we get imprecision within the pitchers.
So you want an umpire pitcher fixed effect?
So I wouldn't actually use fixed effects here. I would do a random effects. Then you could recover the percentage of the umpires who give the pitchers favoritism. So just comparing how random effects compares to fixed effects. And the nice thing is with random effects you can recover the percentage of the pitchers who favor or umpires favor.
Sounds like a very good robustness test.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to ask on the side quick. You were a pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was like what was it?
Softball.
Great. Okay.
Fast pitch softball.
Fast pitch softball.
But it was my favorite sport, so
Exactly.
I was pretty into it.
Did you get makeup calls?
I did. That's why I think there's gotta be a pitcher fix effect.
Gotta
But
be
it's
a
not the
pitcher
same
fix.
level, so it's.
But was the
I don't know. Because it's people, right? Making calls on things, and it's a big deal. I mean, you're playing for championships and league championships and series, winnings of series, right? I'm just curious to ask one that was a pitcher, like, what are your thoughts on why that umpire is doing what he's doing or what she's doing?
In like what way?
Yeah.
I mean,
The underlying mechanism for making a makeup call.
I just know as a pitcher, you'd only get to make a call within that same batter or the next batter. They weren't gonna do it like the next inning or something like that.
Right. Right.
I think it's proximity, you know, by the time they release the ball, the softball, the pitcher's almost on top of the ball.
Ooh,
Take a
no.
step forward.
Okay,
No,
let's,
it's not too much.
let's just have it for record in the tape. The fastest pitcher, the fastest you're as fast with softball, you're gonna get them pretty fast pitches. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the number?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
I don't
The-
remember.
The gum didn't go that high, right? So like, so
About a 90.
what we're doing right now is we're getting coders who are blind to the research. They're gonna watch a random selection of these bad call makeup calls, like combos that come together for the pitchers and the batters when they're missed calls and makeup calls, to see if they notice anything in terms of the gestures and how those people behave and move. You know, that's one step we can get to it, because we're trying to better understand, especially in this, we're still puzzled, why is it just the batters, at least from the data we have. And then we're in the process of, we designed it, but there's still a lot of things in it that I'm puzzled with. I want to make sure, looking at what happens when a judge has the opportunity to make a bad call, and there's a situation where there's a chance that they're going to make one, and then whether or not they experience this idea of guilt, or then tries to give that back to this person, because this is repeated interaction. Because in baseball, they're up there over and over and over, or the pitcher, you're staring at them over and over and over for 100 and something pitches. So, the study that we're doing here, just to build off of this, the study suggests that, you know, it happens, well, let me back up. The literature we're trying to speak to here in management has to do with the restorative justice literature. There is a lot of, it's a very burgeoning area, this idea of restoring justice, of trying to create, of trying to restore equity. But there's been a lot of work in restorative justice on the receiver, or the person that has been slighted in some way, whether or not they forgive, whether or not they try to make amends, whether or not they try to get back at the person. There's been less work, at least in our area of management, on the person who was given the injustice. I think a lot of it has to do with the way that they use their lab experiments and so forth, and just the very structure of their experiments. But there's been also some work on this idea of apologies. They've commented that, well, apologies can happen in a source of ways to try to make up for something, but the way that they dominantly look at it is through words and through, you know, writing out I'm sorries and things like that. We're looking at it a little bit differently. Now, what they don't know, and what we're trying to get at is, well, when are apologies most likely to happen? When are people trying to make up for something? What are some of the ideas? One of the things we're looking at here is the stakes. That's one thing we're looking at. And then next, we're trying to see if there is this feeling of guilt. Now, it could be some other things moving around there as well. Only more times than tell as we look at this when it comes to negative feedback. If it does end up being guilt, a contribution we'd like to be able to make is, well, what is it that motivates someone to feel guilt in the first place? Is it the amount of stakes? Is it the fact that, well, it may not just be stakes, it's whether or not the guy that you've hurt, the person makes an exclamation of negative feedback. That's awful, right? And it kind of signals to them that it was wrong. So, any questions or further comments are more than welcome. This has been wonderful. Anything else you wanted to say, or old baseball stories you want to share?
Or softball stories.
Softball? No, softball stories are good. No, we'll take softball. No? All right.
Did you ever hit the batter intentionally?
Oh.
Never intentionally, but I have hit that, yeah, of course.
You don't know deep down what you were thinking.
Subconsciously kill him. You know what I mean? Like whatever, right? So
Did you ever aim at the umpire?
I've seen that before. I've seen them do that. But okay. Well, any further comments or things, please feel free to send to me. I look forward to talking to you guys out in the hall, rave, or the gathering we have outside. So,
Okay.
thank you so much for your time. Right?